Hi, this is James Suckling. I'm here in Australia for our second podcast with senior editor Nick Stock. And we're in the Barossa Valley. We've been tasting loads of exciting wines and not so exciting wines from Barossa, Clare Valley, McLaren Vale, Adelaide Hills, Riverlands, all over. Some really cool wines. And we thought we'd discuss what we've been tasting and what's going on here. So Nick, what are you thinking after tasting? Well, we tasted up 800 wines or so.
Yeah, it's it's interesting, the picture. I mean, obviously we're in the Barossa Valley, as you can see, and we've tasted a lot of wines from here, but we've tasted a lot of diverse regions. And the thing that really comes through is you know when you're tasting the Barossa, you know when you're tasting Clare, you know when you're tasting Coonawarra, you definitely know when you're tasting the Adelaide Hills. So that regionality, I think, is really loud and clear. And also, within those regions, we're seeing then, in the case of the Barossa, for example, there's quite distinct sub-regional characters. Totally. Go up to the Eden Valley where it gets really spicy. Those wines are great. Big, powerful, sort of richer wines on the valley floor. So we see the sub-regional characters. But for me, probably the most interesting thing is to see the different producer styles, and to see, what I'm feeling is Australian producers are they're taking the time to think about what they can do that really defines their style, that is quite unique. People aren't trying to be like each other or make the same wines as their neighbours, and that distinctiveness, I think, really, like that's been the most fascinating part of the tasting for me.
Yeah, I totally agree that there's a regional, or let's say area distinctiveness for me, particularly as an American. And a lot of the misconceptions about Australian wines started out from here in the early 2000s, when some people were making wines, particularly for the US market, making very jammy, high alcohol wines that, in my opinion, were impossible to drink. And luckily we're seeing a change to making much more brighter and more balanced wines. So the wines really are transparent, and you can see the regional differences, the sub areas, the even single vineyard character, and that's really important. There's still some pretty jammy wines out there. We had some wines yesterday that were almost 16 degrees alcohol and undrinkable. But in general, you've seen people pulling it away, and I hope that that's something that people can take away from our tastings and from this podcast, is that that's not what Australian wine is about. This is a humongous country.
It's a wine continent.
Wine continent.
Yeah, that great saying.
Yeah, and it's like the size of Europe or the United States. You can't generalize. But the most important thing is real Aussie wine. That's what we are seeking. Wines that really speak to you from where they're from. That's not real Aussie wine, is it, Nick?
It's not, and I think we travel the world, we go everywhere, and everywhere we go, there are great wines and there are bad wines. That's just the fact of growing grapes and making wine, and Australia is no different. But what I'm seeing that I think is really interesting, that people need to know about, is this distinctiveness. There's the courage to sort of make wine in your own style, in your own way, and there's the skill and the experience, the broad tasting, the travel, all of these sorts of things are sort of underpinning what is what this thing we're calling real Aussie wine is. Is a new moment, and it's a new generation, it's a new philosophy, it's a new way of thinking, and the wines they're fascinating, they're interesting. Going through the tastings, I'll have typically 20 or more wines lined up at once, and I'm looking forward to every glass. It's like, what is this wine going to be doing? What is it going to say? Where's it from? And how is it going to express that?
I think that also South Australia, where we are, the wines, as you say, regional differences, but also there's a real movement for natural wines, low sulfur wines, and that's been exciting. And Jack just bailed to Bangkok. He couldn't stay for the whole trip because he lives there. But
bye, Jack.
Hey, Jack, sorry we missed you. But anyways, I think that's really exciting that you have traditional producers like Torbeck just killing it, and others, but then you have these really exciting, let's say, I wouldn't call them natural because they use some sulfur, but let's say more avant-garde or new wave producers like Ochota Barrels and other guys, Bloom and people like that. And I think that's really, really cool. And that's been exciting for me as well, where you're finding, probably if you're into natural wines or into low sulfur wines, that I would say this area in the world is producing some of the most diverse and well-made natural wines.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that's really interesting about that space in Australia, is that the wines are, they're well farmed, often organic and biodynamically farmed, vineyards that are supplying the grapes that make these wines, and then the winemakers are making wine in a low or no input way, but with a very close attention to detail, and I think that's probably, it is a younger generation mostly that are doing that. It's the Brendan Keys, the Taras Akotas, the Fraser McKinleys from Samioti. It is this sort of younger generation, but they've grown up sort of understanding that wine quality in terms of the experience of drinking it is everything, and so to be able to make wine in this way and still deliver a fantastic level of quality is kind of is a sort of a bit of an inbuilt DNA for that generation of winemakers. And again, you get these incredibly pure, vibrant, and just compelling and interesting wines to taste.
I agree. Okay, so we moved to our tasting room to get out of the birds and all the sounds of refrigerator engines. But Nick, so you were talking about how these young guys are making natural wines, like minimal intervention, low sulfur wines, and why, which I think is really interesting, why they're so clean and well made. Because a lot of times people think natural wines have to have volatile acidity or be oxidized or just not be good wines. That's natural wine, which actually the wines are actually more difficult to see their authenticity and purity if there's flaws in them. But these guys are making hyper well-made wines, low intervention.
Yeah, I think if a great wine is a great wine, and it can be made in a number of different ways. And the guys that are sort of this new generation making wines with low or no intervention are first of all sourcing grapes that have been really well grown. So farmed organically, farmed biodynamically. And that's absolutely important, because you can't make great wine without great quality grapes, but you can't sort of allow those grapes to sort of be the whole story if the quality's not there. And so that's the first and foremost thing. And it's actually interesting because this generation of younger winemakers who are wanting to make wines this way are actually redefining the parameters of farming in Australia. So growers are actually realizing that if they grow better quality grapes, if they farm according to better, more sustainable principles, they're actually going to have a big say in the future of Australian wine. And so it goes even beyond this generation of winemakers to a generation of growers and farmers. But
how do they, for example, like you taste a wine with low sulfur or no sulfur, except for what's a byproduct of the fermentation, like what are they doing? They're just super cleanly. They're like making sure the cellars are just squeaky clean. And like, what do you think they're doing so they make these transparent, let's say natural, low sulfur wines?
Yeah, sure. I mean, they're a generation that has has grown up understanding what wine quality is and purity, and they are working very hard to understand where the best vineyard sites are, and they're definitely not going to then just through ignorance or carelessness in the winery allow the best quality grapes from the best sites they can find come unstuck in the winery. So they're very careful. They're very close. Their attention to detail is second to none, and the quality of these wines at the other end is a result of all these things, and the purity that you get in these wines. I mean,
what surprised phenomenal. Me also is when we had dinner with a lot of them the other night, a couple nights ago, at Vintners, which is a really cool restaurant, and that they actually were digging on tasting really traditional wines, whether it was Torbreck or other guys, even older wines, Hewitson, whatever. They're like, it's not like, oh, I make natural wines or low intervention wines and other wines aren't any good. These guys love wine.
Yeah, they do. And I think, we had 30 odd winemakers from all around South Australia in that room at the restaurant. And what's great to see is they can see that everyone is making really interesting wine, and sure, different people make it different ways. Everyone's got their own style, and this is what we're seeing in our tasting, here in South Australia in particular, is that everyone is making something that is very unique. The quality, is there, but it's that uniqueness, it's that distinctiveness. And seeing, winemakers actually, they taste each other's wines and they sort of, think, oh wow, I didn't realize you were doing this, or I didn't know you were doing this way, or so there's this real, such an interesting landscape, with such distinctive wines being made, and I think there's a lot of pride in the winemaking sort of space in Australia to actually be able to say, hey, I'm actually growing grapes the right way. I'm farming well, and I'm not using unnecessary intervention or taking shortcuts in the winery. I'm actually doing everything properly and really understanding the process and really enjoying and kind of celebrating that journey to making great wine.
But that's also, I think that people have to also realize, we're talking about a small percentage of the entire production of Australia as well. Many are a few hundred cases, 1,000, 2,000 cases, but also some bigger producers too, names that you'll know, like Penfolds or
Henschke are huge biodynamic farmers. Darrenberg are farming biodynamically. It's starting to actually pervade the psyche and the philosophy of very mainstream producers.
But it's just to say that also there's a lot of very commercial wines, Yellowtail, things like that. So it's just so that when you go out and you want to buy Australian wine, real Aussie wine, look for the scores, read the story, check out the cool names. I mean, it's going to take some. On a lot of cases, it'll take an effort to find some of these wines, particularly in markets where they don't export. And that's the problem. You guys, like some of these coolest wines, they're even hard to find in Adelaide. So it'll take some effort, but I think that it's really worth it because they're really fun, exciting, and it's really a joy to be down here and taste those wines.
I think that's just life, mate. The best things in life, you have to work a little bit harder to
Sometimes people forget.
I think we need to not bash the table because it might actually be hitting the microphone there.
One thing that people need to think about as well is that it's not only red wines, like people talk about Shiraz or Pinot Noir, Cabernet, but for example in South Australia, Rieslings are really exciting wines.
Yeah.
And you have an array of styles which can go from, let's say, areas like the Pfalz in Germany to Alsace or also Austria.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really cool. Rieslings, I just basically told these guys after a while, I'll be the Riesling guy in South Australia. And it's been really fun to taste the wines and see all the different character in the wines, bodies, dryness, spiciness. That's really exciting. And then we tasted a lot of other cool things like Gruner Veltliner, Vermentino. That's really cool. It's not just Chard down here.
Well, if you're one of the Riesling guys, I'll be the Chardonnay guy. I'm wildly excited by the Adelaide Hills, and the quality of Chardonnay coming out of there. And you've got brands like Penfolds. That's one of their sort of best hunting grounds for their top parcels of Chardonnay. Then you've got producers like Murdoch Hill, Shaw and Smith. There's some really, really reliable, high quality Chardonnay. Brendan Keys, BK, making great Chardonnay from the hills too.
What was that crazy Chard we had that was aged 6.5 years in barrels with floor?
That's Brash Higgins. So Brad Hickey, former American sommelier. Now resident of McLaren Vale, he's making this wine called Bloom, which is crazy. Most beautiful looking bottle. But yeah, I mean, spending 6.5 years to sort of see if a wine's going to come out the other end.
I think I scored a 97 or something. But they only made 49 cases. I remember because I was trying to think, how can I get a bottle or two? It's nuts, and that's what's exciting. These really off-the-wall wines like that, but that are still pristinely made.
Well, you can ask Brad today. We're going to be we're actually heading down to McLaren Vale in a couple of hours, and
I'll have to twist his arm.
Brad's going to be at that gathering we're having down there. We're going to see all the McLaren Vale winemakers.
Awesome.
So you can have a chance to talk to him. I'm sure that you can imagine how invested he is. Sort of 7 or more years.
Was that the first wine he made like that?
The second one he's made like that. Yeah. Yeah,
that's nuts.
Yeah, it is. It's crazy, and it's brave. You know, like, and that's what I was saying before. You know, earlier on when we were sitting outside, the courage that we're seeing, you know, winemakers show, the risks we're seeing Australian winemakers take. Where before they were working in a pretty safe sort of the slow lane, if you like, and now we're in the kind of the fast lane of excitement, risk taking, making wines with courage, and underpinned by incredible quality.
And where are all these wines? Like, where can you find them in Australia? Do you buy them directly from the winery, or is it only in like cool restaurants or a few wine shops, or is it direct mail?
I think you'll find you always find restaurant wine lists. Particularly in Australia, the food scene is crazy good, and the wine scene is crazy good. So restaurant lists are a great place. So you can find them there if you're visiting. But I always say with these producers, get in touch with them directly, talk to them.
Good idea.
If you live in the US, if you live in Beijing, if you live in Hong Kong, if you live in Paris, get in touch. The producers love to hear from people that are interested in their wines, and they'll put you in touch with whoever you need to speak to be able to get at their wines and enjoy them. And there's nothing better than I think showing your direct support, and maybe actually having a chance to talk to these producers directly, firsthand.
Yeah, they're really, really friendly and incredibly just nice, like almost hard to believe.
They're Aussies, mate. That's what we like.
That's why I like coming
down. We're
We're
very friendly people, and we love the fact that that we are a long way away from everywhere, but that there's real interest in the wines down here now. It's a new thing, man. It really is.
Okay, well, Nick, thanks again for the conversation. It's fun to talk about real Aussie wines. We've had a great time already in South Australia, and now we're off to Melbourne. That should be fantastic.
Yep.
And taste some awesome wines there. So we'll be back with our next podcast from Melbourne. So stay tuned.
See you there.
That's really interesting because you can see. Hold on, I gotta give this. Oi! Let's get these birds to go. I'm gonna chase them away.
All right. James is going bird chasing. The thing that's happening with pulling away all of these.
Okay, I think we should move inside because of the hummer on the generator.
Well, they're probably sick of the sound of our voices right now. So
we're gonna move to another room and keep this going.